Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's podcast. My name's Charlotte, and I work as a Year 2 teacher in a primary school in London. If you haven't heard any of Hanaz Writers Podcast before, then have a listen on their podcast channels. They've got one on Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, YouTube, and Spotify. You can search for Hanaz Writers Podcast on these websites, and then you can start listening to all the available podcasts on them. In the next few podcasts, I have been talking about the 7 different types of creative writing, and they are poetry, plays, movies and television scripts, fiction such as novels, novellas and short stories, songs, speeches, memoirs, and personal essays. In previous podcasts, I've already talked about short stories, novels, plays, movies and television scripts, songwriting, poetry and speeches, and how they're thought of as creative pieces of writing. And I compared them to each other and discussed how similar and different they are. In today's podcast, I'm going to be talking about another form of creative writing, memoirs, and why they're seen as powerful forms of creative writing as well. But first of all, what is a memoir? You might be thinking, isn't a memoir non-fiction, like real life? Yes, it is, but it's also creative writing. A memoir is a slice of a person's life. It's told from their point of view, and it's with all the color and emotion and texture that their memory can bring to that event or that memory. And unlike an autobiography, which spans a lifetime, a memoir can kind of zoom in on a particular time or a period or relationship and talk you through that moment. And just because it's based on true events, it doesn't mean that it's written like, a newspaper article or a boring daily thing that's happening or something along those lines. It's written in a way that is creative, and it's written to interest the reader and help the reader to get a better understanding of the event that has happened or what the person was thinking and feeling at that time. Before I carry on, let me define what I mean by creative writing in this sense. And it doesn't just mean fictional writing. When you write a story, you're writing fictional character and events that happen to them. So with a memoir, they use the same kind of literary tools that a writer does. They have to set the scene, they have to have the dialogue, metaphors, if they're going to throw some metaphors in or similes. They have to have the pacing of the story and even some tension in there as to what will happen next. And they want to tell a compelling story to the reader. In a memoir, the events are real, but the telling of it is crafted. Now, let's note that when you write a memoir, you're writing about a memory of an event that you have experienced. And let's remind ourselves that memory is subjective. It's messy. It might change over time, as we forget bits and pieces, or we remember certain things a lot more clearly than others. And that's okay. When you write a memoir, you're not just reporting like a police incident, or as I said earlier on, something boring. You're exploring what happened and how it felt and what it meant to you at that time or now that you're recording the event and writing about it. So you're reconstructing truth from the unreliable narrator that is your own mind in this sense. Creative memoir embraces your subjectivity. It leans into the idea that your experience of an event, your emotions about it, your senses about it, your interpretation of it are just as important as the event itself. In fact, writers such as Michelle Obama or Anne Frank or Ta-Nehisi Coates, they build their entire narrative and personal transformations, not on just a chronicle record of facts, but on an emotional and psychological arc. And that's where creativity comes in. So what then actually helps to make a memoir creative? We're going to break down a few of the literary techniques that memoirists use in their writing and how they blur the line between fact and art. And number one is the scene setting. So instead of saying something like, my dad was abusive, a memoirist might paint you the picture and show you the scene. It might talk about the smell of the beer on his breath. They might talk about the sound of his voice getting louder and angrier as he speaks to you. They might talk about silence at the dinner table or silence that echoes around the house. And it's not just reporting about it, it's storytelling and making you feel you're there. Dialogue is another thing. Real conversation sometimes rarely make for good reading. It's kind of boring and repetitive or one or two lines. So memoirists can recreate a dialogue that maybe captures the essence of what was said or what was not said, even if the exact words are lost and they forget verbatim what was said word for word. What the writer wants to do is capture the emotion of what was said, capture the essence of it, even if they can't remember exactly word for word what was said. Or sometimes what was not said. They might even, have to add in the physical aspects as well. Sometimes people talk to you and they had eye gestures or they hand gestures or body gestures and movements. And it's difficult to explain this without having to write it down. So when you're writing, you write the words, sure, but you have to add, he said with a gesture of his hands openly, or you could say he waved as he said it, or you could say he looked confused, or, and that's very creative writing when you think about it, because you have to explain how the other person looks and feels as well as your own from what you remember. The structure of memoirs are also not linear. So you're not writing at 8 o'clock, I woke up, 9 o'clock, I went to work, 10 o'clock, I was sitting at work and had my break, 11 o'clock, so on and so on. Writers can play with the time in their memoir. They can talk about flashbacks, they can have circular narratives, they even can have like thematic grouping depending on what they're talking about. And they reflect as well on how they remembered things, how they actually remembered the things at the time. They could have said at that time, I didn't understand what she meant when she said so and so. But now that I think about it, I think this is what she meant when she said blah, 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 blah. And you can think of it this way, that life happens in order. Yes, things happen in a linear way as you live it. But the memoir happens in the meaning of what was happening. So something may have been said at the time, which maybe you didn't get it. Sometimes it takes a while and you didn't understand what the meaning was. But now then you're thinking about it and you're writing about it again, you actually realize, oh, that's what he meant. Oh, that's what she meant. So the memoir kind of helps you to clarify and understand a little bit more about what actually happened. The voice of a memoir is also very intimate and reflective and often lyrical. It draws you in. It's meant to draw in the reader. The reader wants to read on. They don't want to be bored to death. So they want to have something. They need to read it in your way, but also be entertained by it. But it's not objective. It is personal as well because it's written by you. It's your own intimate writing. It's your personal voice. It's your personal writing. It's what's happening to you. But when you write it in the memoir, it's crafted in a way to make the reader feel like they're right there with you and also living the same experiences as you are when you write it. So it's a very specific kind of way of writing your story so that people are interested in it and they understand it and they learn about it and they want to know what happened next. That's the most important part of a memoir. How can you write something to help people understand and make them want to keep reading to find out what's going to happen next? Another thing to think about as well is how true does a memoir have to be? Of course, creative writing in this sense, when you're writing a memoir, doesn't mean that you're writing a fictional story. You're writing something that's true, something that's happened, and you can't make stuff up. You can't talk about, say, a unicorn arrived in front of my house this morning and picked me up to go to work. It was my Uber today. You can't talk about magical carpets and genies, and you can't talk about being, unless you're a princess, maybe. I don't know. But you can't talk about being a princess if you're not a princess. But you can say, I felt like a princess because I wore the most beautiful dress I had found. And then you can talk about that, describe the dress and go into detail there. But you can and often must reimagine the scenes to the best of your ability. You could be thinking of a time maybe 20 years ago and it's a bit blurry and things that you used to do when you were a kid, and how it's very different nowadays. You could also condense timelines as well. You could combine some characters together. You could even skip over things that don't serve the story. For example, if you're traveling on the train to go to Edinburgh and you're going on a week-long trip to Edinburgh, you would skip the whole 4 hours sitting on the train. You wouldn't really talk about it unless something noteworthy happened on that journey and you met an interesting person, which you then met later down the line while you were in Edinburgh. Then yes, that would be the purpose of the story. You're like, oh, I met this person again. Like it was fate or like it was meant to be. Something along those lines. But if nothing of note or it wasn't noteworthy, nothing happened on the train, you wouldn't write about it. You just say, I got on the train from London King's Cross and travelled 4 hours up to Edinburgh. As we passed along the way, maybe I saw some beautiful countryside and animals and sheep and or you could say the train was empty, the train was full, just glossing over those facts. And then you get to Edinburgh and then you start talking about the specific thing or event that you want to talk about. So there's a difference between lying and a difference between shaping the narrative in a memoir. And a memoir asks, what is the emotional truth? What really happened in your heart, in your memory, and in your soul during that time? To quote the memoirist Vivian Gornick, she says, what happened to me is not what matters. What matters is what I make of what happened. Why do memoirs matter then? Memoirs matter because it makes the personal universal to others. Helps to give some shape to the chaos and turns pain into joy or pain and confusion into art. Creative art, writing. And that art has the power to connect us to our readers, maybe challenge us as well, and also to heal us as well. When you're writing about something that's happened in the past, maybe you didn't have time to process it fully at that time, or you haven't thought about it in a long time. And now that you're writing about it, you understand things a bit more. With age as well comes wisdom. So maybe when you were 10 years old and something happened and you didn't realize it was going to be such a big event, especially at that time when you're 10, you just think, oh, that happened, and then you move on. But as you get older, you realize, wow, if I hadn't met this person, if I hadn't joined this club, if I hadn't done this at that time, I probably wouldn't be where I am today. I may have gone down a different path completely. And another thing about memoirs is you don't have to be a famous person to write your memoir. You just have to be honest and curious and creative. At the end of the day, it's your life. And your life is a story. Your life is your story. And if you're a writer, the act of telling a story, it can be done beautifully and wonderfully. And it can be magical when that happens. So next time someone says that a memoir isn't creative writing, just smile and hand them a copy of The Year of Magical Thinking, or a copy of Educated, or even the copy of On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, and let them read it for themselves and tell you. And that's it for this podcast. Thank you very much for listening. And if you're someone who loves telling stories, then think about how you could write your own memoir. Pick a certain event or moment in time that you experienced and have a go at writing it creatively. Write it with your own voice and ask someone to read it in the future. Or if you're not sure if you want anyone to read it, write it for yourself and see how it goes. If you enjoyed this podcast and you would like to listen to more, then like and subscribe to Hanaz Writers on their podcast channels. They've got one on Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, YouTube, and Spotify. You can search for Hanaz Writers Podcast on these websites, and you can start listening to all the other available podcasts on them. If you are interested as well in becoming a published author yourself, then why not visit Hanaz Writers website and you can sign up for free. You can write your own stories, your poems on there. You can even write your own memoirs and autobiographies, and you can get help and guidance on how to publish them through the website. Thank you very much for listening, and until next time, bye.